All right, everybody. Let's see. Let me look at my... So this will be the week of April 13 to 19, according to my calendar here. And today, Karl Marx, all right, and socialism. Man, oh man. I guess this is true of a person in any particular area. Like, let's say you're a football player. You probably get sick and tired of hearing the average person on the street saying, well, I wouldn't have run that way at all. They should be passing the ball. And you're thinking, shut up. You don't have any idea what you're talking about. They're trying to set up a play, 3 plays from now, or they don't have any wide receivers that can actually catch the ball or whatever. You probably get really annoyed when you hear people talking as if they are know-it-alls about your area of expertise. Well, that happens to me as an economist too. And one of the places that I find especially frustrating is everybody accusing everybody else of being a socialist or a communist and having no idea what those words mean and basically saying them just so they can say you're a bad person. That person's a jerk. That person's a lowlife or whatever. So let's have a lesson in what socialism really is and what communism really is, all right? So that's what this week is going to be about that. Now, I have a YouTube series called The Cowboy Economist. You can look it up. In fact, I believe I have www.cowboyeconomist.com, I think, reserved. If you go there, you can find a link to all my stuff. In the very first video, so anyway, I put on that cowboy hat that I believe I've shown you before, or maybe that's in lecture 15, I can't remember. Here. I put on my cowboy hat, and then I talk kind of like this here about, a buddy of mine the other day was saying that he has a neighbor that might be a socialist, and so, crap like that. Now, as a matter of fact, by the time you watch this video, if all goes well, I will have returned during our spring break from going to Edinburgh, Scotland, where they put together this event called Scotonomics, and I'm supposed to speak as the Cowboy Economist about different schools of thought in economics, which honestly I'm kind of intimidated by. I don't mind doing it on the camera, but it's like in front of people, pretend that I'm a Texan. Okay, I'll try. And so anyway, the very first video I ever made in putting this Cowboy Economist stuff together was on socialism. So I want to suggest that you watch that first, all right? You have 2 assignments this week. One is to watch that video, and there's quiz questions coming from it. And one is to read a chapter from my book on different schools of thought, which is on Marx. The video is just on socialism. The chapter is on Marx, all right? So it's not quite the same thing, as you'll see here when we get to the end. You'll see what I mean. On the chapter, on the video, I also downloaded and made available to you on our webpage the transcript that YouTube automatically makes. It's not the best in the world. I sat there myself and tidied it all up and made it a little bit easier to read. But it's something, all right? It's something that maybe if you want to use that as notes or whatever, you can. Or you can just take notes while you're watching the video. But there are things from the video that are on the quiz. All right, so let's start with the Cowboy Economist. And a lot of real funny stuff there. I'm sure you'll be laughing like crazy. But this is what I'm really getting down to. What really is socialism? And I split it between 2 things. Little s socialism and big S socialism. And what I basically end up arguing is that all of us are little s socialists. All of us are, all right? But very few people are big S socialists. And here's the distinction that I drew, all right? Big S socialism, and let's see here. Yeah. Distribution of a good or service by a means other than income. How did I get age 78 Vikings invasions of England? I spent some money. This was allocated to me. I got this because I spent some money. I spent some of my income. Not socialism, right? Not socialism. How did I get my cell phone? I spent money. It came out of my income. How did we decide who got to have a cell phone? We used income to decide who got to have a cell phone. How did I get this gaming controller? I got this green pen from work, so I just kind of stole that. And so on like that. If you got something because you paid for it like that, then that's not socialism. All right, well then what is socialism? Well, the example I use in the book, or in the video is, what if you're getting robbed and you dial 911 real quick and the police show up? They don't ask you for, okay, now, I'm sorry, but rescuing somebody from a robbery attempt is, oh, was there a gun involved? Oh, there was. Okay, well, there's a premium on that. That's going to be $150, all right? You owe me $150 for saving you from this criminal. We hand out police protection because you need it, not because you had the money to get it. Now, you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, but I paid taxes. Okay, here's an example. A German tourist is downtown Fort Worth at Sundance Square and somebody tries to rob him. The police don't say, wait a minute, you didn't pay taxes here. They don't say that at all. They hand out police protection by the need for police protection. How do we fund police protection? Through taxes. And the taxes are, generally speaking, the more money you have, the more taxes you pay. So it's a little bit socialist. It is, we supply it from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. So things that we supply, public school. Public schools are socialist, a little less socialist. Police departments are a little less socialist. The United States Marine Corps is a little less socialist because you get protection from the Marine Corps because you're being invaded by Canadians or whatever, right? Not because you had to pay for it. What about you got termites in your house? Well, that's not socialism. That's going to be you going to have to pay for it, all right? Oh man, I got a leak outside in the yard. I'm going to have to dig that up tomorrow to figure out what it is. Ain't gonna be any socialism there. I'm gonna have to pay for it. Now they are going to distribute plumbing services by income. If we distribute it by income, TCU is not socialist. All right, TCU is in the private sector. In order to go to TCU, you have to have income. Now there are some institutions where we combine the two. Like, University of Texas is cheaper tuition because there's also tax money there, so they make it more available, but not completely available, unless you have a scholarship, but even TCU does that. So anything that we distribute by a means other than income is little s socialist, all right? And the public library, it's little less socialist. Yeah, I've already said all that right there. Yeah. NASA, Air Force, Marine Corps, the national parks are all little s socialist. Now, perhaps you believe that nothing should be distributed unless it's via income. All right, then I was wrong. We aren't all little less socialists, but almost everybody. I was on a radio station one time, interview with this guy that was a libertarian type, was on the, he was a very nice man, but I didn't generally agree with him. But I was like, what about orphans? They got nobody to look after them. He said, no, he agreed with that. Orphans should just get free care. Orphans don't have to build up a bill that they have to pay back later in life. They're already screwed as it is. We have enough in our society to take care of orphans. So generally you can find everybody probably has something where they think, well, no, actually you shouldn't have to pay for that, all right? That it's got to be paid for, so we have to have a way to finance it. But when you need it, we're not charging you more. We don't charge you more for fire protection. We don't charge you more, well, actually they do in some counties, more for police protection. In most other countries, it's the same way with health care, that everyone pays taxes to pay for the health care. But if you never get sick, you never get it. And if you get sick, then you get whatever you need, as far as what service is required. So that's a little less socialism. And again, You would be hard-pressed to find anyone who wasn't a little s socialist. Big S socialist is very different. This is, let's see, I'm going to write this in red because it's communist. Social ownership of the means of production. Social ownership of the means of production. All right. Basically, what we don't want are owners anymore, owners of capital. All right. We're going to get rid of them. So, like in the book, was it using an example here? Okay, Exxon. What if we had Exxon owned by the American people in the same way that NASA is owned by the American people? Or the same way that the Marine Corps is owned by the American people, right? This is against there being owners of factories, owners of land, owners of people who earn income, and we'll talk about this more here in the Marx chapter. People who earn income just from owning, all right? You got to be working if you want some money. In this world. In this world, you have to be doing something in order to get income. But anything that's privately owned, Walmart, let's see, I'm out of things after Walmart. Oh, restaurants, like Taco Bell, all right? So they would not have owners anymore. And that would include like the stock market, because the stock market, you spread the ownership out over individual people. In essence, all of the American people would own an equal share of Taco Bell. So this is very, very different. I have never seen an American politician of any importance whatsoever, I'm sure there's somebody that said this, that has been arguing for, hey, what we need to do is to publicly own every corporation and company in America. So when you see people accusing other politicians of being socialists, they're not. There are no socialist American politicians. There simply aren't any. Not this kind. This kind, every American politician is one of these. Now, we can still have disagreements over how much stuff should be by a means other than income. All right, there still can be disagreements, but I don't. As I said, you would be hard-pressed to find somebody that didn't think that something ought to be distributed by a means other than income. And you would be hard-pressed to find anyone in the United States who believes this, all right, that all corporations, all companies should be publicly owned by the state. All right, that's very unusual. And by the way, one of my favorite examples of what if we privatized the Army? What if we made the Army no longer little less socialism? And it just occurred to me in class one day, I was like, well, how would the Army work if it was private? Well, first of all, there'd need to be competing armies, right? And then you'd get I hope I didn't wake the dog up. He's in the other room resting. You get a knock on the door, and there'd be a person standing outside the door. Hello, I am Captain Johnson. Are you afraid of Canadians? Me too. And we have 3 levels of protection against Canadians. So you'd have to subscribe to the Army to have your house protected against Canadian incursion or something like that. We would have definitely lost World War II if we had a privatized Army that depended on people buying voluntarily subscriptions in the same way that we do extended warranties or something like that. So let's see here. I think... Oh, yeah. Already said that. The one last thing I want to address here from the video is that the possibility that anyone who believes the first one, anyone who believes in little s socialism is kind of on their way to big S socialism. And I hope you can see via these definitions here that those are extremely different. You're going to understand a lot more about this when we do the Marx chapter, because Marx does think this. Marx thinks that there should be social ownership of the means of production. So we're going to go over all the reasons behind this. And so Marx's view of socialism is not this. I know actual Marxists. They think this is pretty wimpy. I know actual Marxists who, I know Barack Obama was accused of being a Marxist. Are you kidding me? I mean, corporations loved him. This is what you would hear from Marxists. Marxists would be like, are you kidding me? He's cozying up to the private sector all the time, especially some of his cabinet appointments. So anyway, is this a gateway drug to big S socialism? Well, no. Hopefully you can see by now that how different those two things are. The difference between, hey, some stuff ought to be handed out by means other than income versus every corporation and company should be publicly owned by the people. I started to say owned by the state, but that, well, we'll get into that. Let's get into Marx. All right, so that's everything you need from the video, and I hope you enjoy the video. And I hope that my talk went well in Edinburgh, because as I say, by the time you watch this, I will have already done it. I guess I'm going to have to get one of those cases for my hat, because I don't want to wear it all the way there, because you got to. It's a two-stop flight any way you do it. You can't go non-stop from DFW to Edinburgh, so I don't want to wear the hat the whole way or have to hang on to it on my lap or whatever. So I need to get a little carry-on thing. But you know what? That's my problem, not yours. All right, Carl. Karl Marx and Marxism. The first problem is, okay, so, I told you in the last video that I wrote this book on different schools of thought, and I tried to do my best to, what if I really believe this, and write the chapter as if I believed everything that was in there, so that way I could be fair to everybody. A second thing I did to try to be fair to all the other schools of thought, because I lean heavily towards post-Keynesianism, which is the Keynes stuff, and something called institutionalism, right? And by the time I got done with the book, I still leaned very heavily towards post-Keynesianism and institutionalism. I learned a lot of stuff from other schools of thought. I learned some interesting things from other schools of thought, but I did not get converted by any other schools of thought. So, to be fair to them, not only did I try to write every chapter as if it was the greatest thing I'd ever heard of, but I also sent it to at least one member of that school of thought. So I had a Marxist read the Marxist chapter for me. Real nice man, Andrew Kleiman. I'd known him for years. And he's a very well-known Marxist scholar. And he said, the opening problem is there's so many things passed for Marxism that there's Marxist art, there's Marxist poetry, there's Marxist science, and he said, I don't even know if I'm a Marxist anymore. He said, he's inspired by some things Marx said, but he didn't even know if he was really a Marxist anymore. So one of the problems with Marxism is it's hard to pin it down as what it is, because so many things pass for it, or rather, so many people claim to be coming from a Marxist perspective. A lot of times it's just somebody that, what did I say here in the book? Which I thought was a good way of saying it, which is why I wrote it in the book. Because of its high profile and obvious anti-establishment bent, it is an attractive destination for anyone dissatisfied with the mainstream, regardless of their affinity for or knowledge of his, as in Marx's, work. So people call themselves Marxists even when they got no idea what it's about. All right. So how are we going to solve this problem in the chapter? Well, let's just go back to Marx. Let's not talk about modern Marxism and all the ways it's gone. We will do a little bit of that later. But let's just talk about Marx first, all right? And Marx was alive when, John? He was born in 1818, all right? Auf Deutschland, yeah? Oops, sorry. I put 188, then had to push a 1 in the middle there. He was born in Germany. In Prussia, which is now part of Germany. And his father was a well-respected lawyer. He was born Jewish, the father was, but he converted for political reasons. This happened a lot of time in the old days, that people would convert to whatever the popular religion was around them, so they didn't have to put up with any crap from anybody. So anyway, he became a Lutheran. And when Marx went to college, it's going to be very important here. When Marx went to college, he was really influenced by a guy named Hegel. Not personally, I don't think anyway. When did Hegel die? Well, Hegel would Hegel would have died when Marx was 13. So Hegel's ideas were very important to Marx. All right? Georg, let's see, Georg Friedrich Wilhelm Hegel, all right? And he was a philosopher and a historian. And Hegel believed that society moved through stages, that ideas moved through stages, and that any idea in its early form at first seems like it's a good idea. But then as you pursue it, there's the dog, then as you pursue it, you realize, actually it's not as clever as I thought it was. Here, let me show you this diagram here. By the way, this is one of the things I had wrong in the book. Coble, come. That didn't work. I don't know what he saw. Probably a SQ. And you know what SQUIRREL? I dare not say the word out loud. And Melanie's not home, so I'm going to have to deal with this myself. Anyway, when Andrew Kleiman sent back my chapter with his notes, 6 single-spaced pages of what I had done wrong. God. So it took me weeks to work up the courage to read his notes. But he was right. And one of the things I had misunderstood, which he said this comes from, somebody misinterpreted this years ago, something about Hegel, and it was easy to understand. So it just kind of became the common textbook explanation. Here's the unfortunate thing. I understood the old explanation. I'm not real clear on the new one. All right, so here is how Hegel thinks the world works. There's some abstract idea that, oh good Lord, dog, be quiet. All right. There's some abstract idea that becomes obvious to us that it's not the right way to do things, and then we fix them. All right. I don't know how else to say. Okay, I'll give you the example that I've given for years. That Coble, come, Coble, come. Okay, here he comes. Okay, so this is going to be a crazy example, but come. Hegel, it makes me think of this, the description. Come here. All right, one Thanksgiving, my parents were here, Melanie's parents were here, and both of our daughters were young enough to where they were still here at home, right? So we have a house full of people, and it's pouring down rain. And we have a pool room, only unfortunately the pool means billiards, not swimming, all right? It starts flooding, water starts coming in. So I was like, crap, what am I going to do about this? First of all, the two dads, my dad and Melanie's dad, were offering way too much help, and I had to go over to Melanie and say, can you distract our dads so that I can get this fixed? All right, so she did that. Oh yeah, we'll take care of this over here. All right, so anyway, I'm trying to figure out what the problem is. It has to do with the gutter, right? It's come loose, so I fixed that. Only that's not the whole thing. Now I realize there's a different problem. So then I had to figure out how am I going to block the water that's coming in down here, and I blocked that. But then there's water coming in somewhere else. All of the ideas were getting me closer and closer to a dry pool room. But each one, as I employed it, I realized its internal problems that were with it. And Hegel says this is the way society advances. Society tries out new ideas, and they might be better than the previous ideas. I mean, every solution I tried with the flooding in the pool room, it was helping, but it wasn't the whole thing. It then allowed me to see, but there's another problem over here. That's the really weird kind of way I think about Hegel, all right? That, society, as we try out a new idea, and that's a little bit better than the old idea. Ooh, but wait, now that we've solved that issue, I can see this other issue. Now, eventually, what society is working towards, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to stand up and write this with him on my lap, is toward a society based on rationality, constitutional rights, and freedom. All right, I'm just going to tell you. You got it in the chapter. That society is working its way towards rationality, constitutional rights, and freedom. All right, and freedom. Oh man, that's a good pen too. Look, where is it, dog? Oh, there it is. Okay, this process So far you might think, oh, okay, maybe so. He has this sort of perfectionist idea that society is getting better and better and better. Hegel did. That things are just going to get better. That we're going to move from the Roman Empire to feudalism to capitalism and so forth like this. We're going to get better and better systems over time. And that seems kind of attractive, doesn't it, to believe that things are going to be getting better. But he thinks that there's a force guiding this whole process, which he calls the Geist, G-E-I-S-T, which is just German for ghost or spirit, right? So I don't know. It's literally kind of like the Force in Star Wars, right? There's this thing that's guiding us towards this better world, right? And is it God? Okay, so I had to read some Hegel to write this chapter, right? I didn't read a lot of Hegel. I read as much Hegel as I needed to write the chapter, and I still don't really get Hegel. And apparently part of the problem is Hegel changed his own mind over his life, which people are free to do, right? And so sometimes it seems like he's talking about God, sometimes it doesn't, but there's this external force that's guiding us. So the idea that, you want to get down now? All right, yeah, go find some SQs. So the idea that society is getting better, we're actually having ideas planted in our heads by this force that ideas change reality in Hegel. This Geist or whatever is planting ideas in our heads. It's planting ideas in Benjamin Franklin's head. It's planting ideas in William the Conqueror's head or whomever, in Lenin's head, all right? And then that leads them to carry out these ideas. So really and truly, the whole process is being determined by this Geist, right? Okay, so Marx, and it was a very popular idea when Marx was in college. So it was the latest new thing. So he was really into it, but he flipped it over. Oh man, he wants outside. I wish Melanie was here. He flipped it over. He was like, yeah, you're right. Society does go through stages. And to Marx, those stages are going to be economic stages of history. He said, but you've got this backwards, Hegel. Marx says that's not the way it works. Reality changes ideas. All right. So Marx says, man, Hegel, you said a lot of good stuff, and I'm really influenced by your idea that society moves through stages, but I think you're off on the whole Geist giving ideas that then cause us to act to change reality. I think reality changes first, and then we make up ideas to justify what we just did. So like, I think I used this example in the book, I can't remember. The divine right of kings, all right? The idea that kings in Europe were chosen by God. So why do I get to rule? By divine right. God chose me. Clearly, God chose me. Now, did they have proof for that? No, but this was the philosophy they used to justify their power and their position. So, Hegel would say that the idea of divine right of kings was implanted in their head from this shared rationality, this Geist, this spirit. Whereas Marx would say society evolved to where a big man was beating up on little people and got all this power, and then they decided, you know what? There's a reason why I'm in charge. It's because God made me in charge, all right? So I made up a reason to justify my position of power rather than the idea creating the position of power itself, rather than the divine right of kings then leading to Western Europe becoming this feudal society. Instead, the collapse of the Roman Empire left Europe in chaos. And so it was a very dangerous world. So you had lots of castles, and then people owed allegiance to the people that were in charge of the castle, and sometimes that was a king, and sometimes it was a lord, whatever. And so this system evolved because of the collapse of the Roman Empire, according to Marx. This feudal Europe evolved because of the collapse of the Roman Empire, not because somebody told them an idea. But as this world became real, as this became the system that they were following, this feudalism, so they started making up, and not necessarily on purpose, maybe they thought, God must have chosen me. Otherwise, why would I be in charge? Cool. All right? So that's the way Marx sees things. So there's your first big influence of... So next time you hear somebody accuse somebody else of being a Marxist, you say to them something along the lines of, well, which aspects of Hegel do you believe that they actually accept, though? And they're going to have no freaking idea what you're talking about, because these people are idiots who are accusing everybody in U.S. politics of being Marxists. Like, there are no Marxists in U.S. politics. Our politics are relatively right-leaning. Even the Democrats are right-leaning compared to most of the rest of the world. There aren't any Marxists. So pull some knowledge on them. Say, yeah, okay, well, I know what you mean, because the way they're really picking up on Hegel's influence, that's not true. Okay, let's see here. Oh, another thing you got to bear in mind about Marx, all right? So he likes this idea of society moving through stages, but he thinks that the stages evolve kind of on their own, and then we make up ideas afterwards. He was also, you got to remember when he's writing. Oh, I'm doing this, of course, right before Christmas. And A Christmas Carol is going to be on TV 100 times, I'm sure. The story about Scrooge and Bob Cratchit and Tiny Tim and so forth. And that world of Scrooge and Tiny Tim is the world that Marx lived in, where it's a dirty world. The abuses of the Industrial Revolution, and there were abuses in the Industrial Revolution, influences Marx to think that this new system, this capitalism, is a bad thing. It's doing horrible things to poor Bob Cratchit, poor Tiny Tim, and so forth, and so it kind of sucks. Now, to be fair, the system before, here, let me show you. These are Marx's stages of history. All right, so we have slave-based societies like Rome and Greece. And notice here, by the way, it's very Western-oriented, and I'm not talking about China, because he probably didn't know that much about China. We've got slave-based societies like Rome and Greece. And then once the Roman Empire falls, then Europe splinters and becomes feudalism, all right? Only after a while, and remember, feudalism is all about everyone's worried and scared, and so we're breaking off into these little tiny, city-states and so forth to protect ourselves from everybody else. But eventually it becomes pretty safe, and we start trading things with each other. And this evolves into capitalism, all right? So that's our current stage of history, all right? Now, hold on to your hat, because you might not know this. Just as Hegel thought things were getting better and better, so did Marx. Marx actually thought capitalism was better than feudalism and better than slave-based societies. So he's not saying capitalism is necessarily bad, it's just not as good as we can be. All right? This is one of the many solutions to the leaking pool room in John Harvey's at that Thanksgiving. Here's where all the water's flowing in. Here's where I'll put some towels down. So he's saying, hey, capitalism is better than what we had before, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet. And do you know what the next stage of history is? Because it's not communism. It is socialism. And then, sorry, I have to do this. Oops. Then communism after that. And that's the last stage of history. Then, just like with Hegel, he thought we were reaching an end point where everything would be cool. All right? I'll talk more about that later. But for right now, this is Marx's stages of history as they go through right here. Oh, yeah. That's what I was going to say. That, remember, Marx is writing at a time in capitalism when things really did suck for the average worker. All right? But to be fair, and this is what made me go off on this tangent here, to be fair, things sucked for the average person under this too. And it really sucked if you were a slave, right? So he's not saying that things aren't better. He's saying things aren't good enough yet. I'm trying to decide if I should tell you. I'll go ahead and tell you. Ultimately, in this stage of history, the idea under communism is what if you could major in anything you wanted in college, regardless of whether it would get you a job or not, just because you liked it? What if you didn't have to go to college? What if you didn't have to worry about having to get a job somewhere, having to make sure that you had a skill set that served someone else? What if you could develop the skills you wanted to develop on your own, just for your own personal enjoyment? That's what this is supposed to be. A world in which people are not forced anymore to have to please somebody else with their labor. They only please themselves. Now, we'll get to more of that in a minute, but under this system right here, you got to work for the man. You're going to be making a profit for somebody. So it's a better system than this. It's a much better system than this. But you're being forced to major in accounting even though you hate accounting and love art because it's the only way you can get a job, right? So that's this system right here. I'll tell you about socialism later. All right, so, As a matter of fact, this leads right into what I was going to say next. One of the bad things about capitalism, remember it's better than feudalism, but one of the bad things about capitalism is alienation. Marx says that workers are alienated from the fruits of their labor. Because of the conditions of capitalism, because you are forced to do something that makes a profit for somebody else, that what you do, like let's say you make cars, all right? You put the doors on cars all day long, all right? That's what you do for your income. Probably not what you would have opted to do if you had any choices, but you're forced to put doors on cars all day long. Then the problem is that the actual act of what you're doing is representative of your no, I don't want slave because that's back here. I want like that your labor becomes symbolic of your powerlessness, let's say. Powerlessness. The very thing you're making. Let's say you really enjoy carving those duck decoys, all right? There are people that do that. They carve their own little decoys and stuff. And so when you're done with one, you're like, oh, that's really cool. Do I have... Oh, I do. Okay. I have a 3D printer, and I'm still waiting to paint these, but these are all modern naval miniatures. I believe that's a Soviet carrier, and that looks more like the Enterprise, and then various submarines and ships. So when I see those things, and all the labor it took to make those and paint them and so forth, they're like, cool, I really enjoyed that whole process, that the act of labor and then the outcome of the act of labor make me feel like a more fulfilled person, as opposed to that stupid frickin' door on the side of that Honda. All right? So workers under capitalism, because they're forced to work to make somebody else a profit, they don't get to have that feeling of enjoyment. Now, some people do. Some people are lucky. I mean, I'm lucky. I mean, I have a job that I love, and I thoroughly enjoy. Well, heck, I've got that Cowboy Economist video, right? Video series. I'm teaching just for fun, all right? So I'm very lucky. But he says a lot of people are stuck in the system here, and they are not free to achieve their true potential. So that's what he sees the problem under capitalism as. By the way, he links it specifically to you have to earn a profit for somebody, and it creates a division of labor. You have to do that one thing for the rest of your life. It's not necessarily true. You might be able to switch off into something else sometimes, but generally speaking, you're kind of stuck doing the same thing all your life. All right. Now, I already told you all that. Told you that. I already told you that. Okay. Now, by the way, the vast majority of Marx's writing is about this system right here. Capitalism. He writes very little about socialism and communism. He's really far more interested in breaking down how capitalism works. By the way, he made up the name. He's the one that named it capitalism. Not many people realize that, but he called it capitalism. In fact, his famous 3-volume work, which I used to have, I think it all fell apart. I took a field in graduate school in the history of economics. So that means I learned about Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, David Ricardo, John Maynard Keynes, and Karl Marx. Now, Marx, when he decided to study capitalism per se, he went to the masters, which does not mean he played golf. He studied the first economist, first modern economist, Adam Smith. He's like, well, if I'm going to learn about capitalism and learn, he's looked around, he's already been influenced by Hegel. He's looked around and seen Tiny Tim and Mr. Scrooge, and he's like, this place sucks. Man, I wonder if it's going to be a better stage at some point. I have to really understand capitalism if I'm going to understand what destroys it and causes us to go to here. So where does he go to learn about capitalism? To Adam Smith. All right, to the father of capitalism. And you probably have heard of Adam Smith, maybe not, but he's the most famous first economist. But even if you've heard of Smith, you probably haven't heard of Ricardo. But he was a follower of Adam Smith who really developed a lot of his ideas. But Marx, he credits them with what he learned, but he went to them to figure out how capitalism actually worked. All right. So when I took my first history of economics class as an undergraduate, they had economists broken into periods, right? Like these two were called classical economists. That era with classical economics had a lot of things in common about the way they studied the economy. Marx is called a classical economist. He is in the same school of thought, Marx is, as these two, as the father of capitalism, because he used the same tools. He didn't just steal the tools, he did credit them with, that's where he got the ideas. In fact, he credits Smith with originally coming up with a theory of exploitation. Let's see if we're up to that yet. Yes. All right. A thing that Marx really relied upon that he got from those two was called the labor theory of value. Sorry. Labor theory of value. The name of Adam Smith's book that he is so famous for is An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. He was trying to figure out what makes a nation wealthy. He's like, is it how much gold you got? Well, that's just a rock. Is it how much wheat you've got? Well, it's a nice thing. He finally decides that the way to measure value is by how much labor was involved in creating something. Like, if this took 1,000 hours of labor and this took 10 hours of labor, then probably 10 of these trade for one of these, right? I'm saying it again, 1,000 hours, 100 hours, then you probably need 10 of these to trade for one of these because of how much effort was expended. That labor is ultimately the most important source of all value. That labor is what creates this TCU horned frog blanket I've got here, this pencil, and so forth. The labor theory of value. Let's measure value by how much labor was involved in creating something, all right? They came up with that idea. I mean, they also drew from other people too. Nobody comes up, well, hardly anybody comes up with things entirely on their own. I will say that apparently Isaac Newton just came up with calculus. But anyway, of course, so did that Leibniz guy. So anyway, in studying capitalism to understand what's wrong with it, and to understand why is it making people sad, and I wonder what's going to destroy it in the end, he goes to the masters. He goes to the originals. And he really likes their idea of the labor theory of value. Now get this. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and erase slave-based and feudalism here. I don't think we need those again. If you labored for 8 hours making something in a factory, then you should be paid the equivalent of 8 hours, shouldn't you? Except if we do that, then there's no room for profit. Marx figured, in fact, let me use his ratio. If the only thing that creates value is labor, and if capitalists, the owners of the factories, not the managers are working, not the engineers are working, I mean just ownership, just owning the factory, all right? If owning doesn't create, it doesn't involve labor, then owning doesn't create value. But the owners are taking money away in terms of profit. And Marx figured that owners took away about half. he figured the rate of exploitation was about 50%. That if something took 8 hours to make, then what's happening is the capitalist is holding back 4 hours of the labor that was involved, the value created by that labor. So the worker is working for 8 hours, but getting paid for 4, because the capitalist is holding back this labor that they don't really deserve because they didn't do any labor, because only labor creates value. Now, Adam Smith, in the back of the Wealth of Nations, says at one point, well, you know, if the only thing that creates value is labor, and if the owners of the means of production, he didn't use those words, but I will here, don't actually do any labor, then they don't really deserve any income. No, that can't be right. Marx says, you just nailed it. Owners of capital don't deserve income. Now, let me give you an example here to try to give you an example that might be compelling. What if, now, do you know who Paris Hilton is? She is the granddaughter of the creator of the Hilton Empire, you know, all the Hilton hotels and stuff. And when I was in my 30s and 40s, I guess, she was on some TV shows, that sort of thing. She's a celebrity, right? But she really didn't do anything to get all the money she's got. But she now owns shares of the Hilton Empire. So, does she deserve the income she gets when she didn't do anything other than inherit ownership of the Hilton Empire? That's where he's coming from. All right, now again, it's useful in any of these arguments here to try to, okay, what would it take to convince me that this is right? Okay, maybe something like that, but that doesn't mean that you end at that point. You still break it down and analyze it and think about it. Well, but wait a minute, what about so-and-so? Right? So, but what he is saying is that owners of capital don't do any labor. Okay, well, let's back it up. I want to understand capitalism, so I'm going to read Adam Smith and David Ricardo. Well, when I read Adam Smith and David Ricardo, I learned about the labor theory of value. Hey, wait a minute. If we got two classes of people, capitalists and workers are doing all the labor, and capitalists aren't doing any labor, because remember, these are just owners. It doesn't mean just a manager. A manager is a worker, right? They didn't do anything. They did no labor. They created no value, but they're still taking some money. They're taking what Marx says, remember this, they're taking what Marx calls surplus value. He sometimes calls that surplus value. It's just, surplus value and profit are the same thing. All right, surplus value. All right, so let's see what else we got here. Here I am going in the book going through that exact same example. And yeah, there are some Marxists who believe that capitalists are evil, mean people. But think about this. They don't need to be evil and mean for this to be an exploitative process. I mean, the rules are what creates this situation here. And so anyway, I talk about that a little bit in the book. Okay. How does capitalism destroy itself? All right. There's a couple of things here. And the most important one I'm going to talk about is the eventual decline of the rate of profit. Capitalists, let's see, let's erase this again. Now, Marx is a big admirer of the productivity of capitalism. And in fact, we can never get to communism if we don't go through a capitalist stage. We have to go through a capitalist stage first, because it's a big boom in our productivity. And a world in which, remember I described to you earlier, a world in which you're like, I want to major in just anything. I want to major in something that's fun, all right? It has to be a very productive world. We have to not need you to grow food, all right? We have to not need that. We must be able to grow food only using the people who enjoy growing food, all right? So it has to be a really productive society. So in order to get to communism, we got to go through a system that really is the sort of first burst of increase in technology. So he's a big admirer of that. However, the problem is going to be this. Substituting machines for workers. There's going to be a strong incentive to do that over time because they're cheaper, all right? You can see that very clearly today, substituting machines for workers. And there's going to be a really strong incentive to do that because it's going to cut your costs as your firm. But the first adopters will make extra money. The first fast food place to put in one of those little deals where you can punch in what you want on your Big Mac, they're going to gain. But by the time everybody else catches up, it's not really a competitive advantage anymore. So you are driven to adopt these things, and the initial adopters will benefit, but once everybody catches up, then it's just business as usual, right? Okay, so there's one side of it. The other side of it is, and I've never quite followed this, I've never quite understood this part of Marx, but this is part of the story. You can exploit a worker, but you can't exploit a machine. You can work a worker for 8 hours and only pay them for 4. But you can't work a machine for 8 hours and not do maintenance on it for 8 hours, all right? So I'm not exactly sure how that works, but apparently it's really important to them that you can only exploit workers, you can't exploit machines. So eventually, you had that initial benefit of putting in those ordering screens at your McDonald's, but once Wendy's caught up, the advantage is gone, and now I don't have as many workers at McDonald's. I laid a bunch of them off because now I've got this ordering screen here. I've only got one person covering the register instead of 3 or 4. I don't have as many people to exploit. Now, are you thinking of it this way? No. The system is causing these outcomes. But the problem is, again, that I can only exploit workers. I can't exploit machines. But there's nevertheless an incentive to substitute machines for workers in the short run. But in the long run, the advantage goes away and profits go down. And so Marx predicted that over time, profits would fall and fall and fall and fall for firms. Now, let me have a look here, make sure I didn't skip something. So as capitalism matures, there's a tendency for the rate of fall, of the rate of profit to fall. And also, no, I'll skim over that part. You can read that yourself. All right, so he says there's going to start to be bigger and bigger crises, recessions, all right? That the financial sector is going to help fund all these things, and there's going to be outright fraud involved, which of course the Marxists looked at the financial crisis that I told you about, where there was definitely fraud, and they was like, this is what Marx said, all right? And that eventually these companies are going to go bankrupt. Ooh, here's a great quote from Marx. All right. Along with the constantly, so the profit, firms are going to go bankrupt, all right? They are going to lower their profits so much that they're going to go bankrupt, and capitalism will no longer be sustainable because they won't be able to make enough profit, all right? So, along with the constantly diminishing number of magnates of capital, so along with the diminishing number of big rich people, who usurp and monopolize all advantages of this process of transformation. So you've got concentration of industries that as these profits are going down, so big companies are buying up the failing companies, and we have fewer and fewer firms. We have greater concentration. Grows the mass of misery, oppression, slavery, degradation, and exploitation. All right, so at the same time as businesses are struggling, but a few big businesses are buying up all the ones that are struggling, at the same time the workers are getting increasingly screwed by the system. Let's see here. This causes a revolt of the working class, a class always increasing in numbers, and disciplined, united, and organized by the very mechanism of the process of capitalist production itself. That's an interesting line there. What he says is that the workers who are being increasingly oppressed also are at the factory together every day. And so the very system that's oppressing them put them together where they can talk to each other and say, take this job and shove it. I ain't working here no more. That's an old country song. And so let's see here. This happens, that happens. The knell of capitalist private property, there's a revolution, right? and the expropriators are expropriated. That means the people who were stealing from us, we take from them. All right, so there's a day of revolution, and then that's when socialism comes in. And by the way, he says they ain't going to give up willingly. We're going to have to fight. All right. Now, what about socialism? How does that work? Now, remember, this is big S socialism. This is there's no more private firms. And now everything is owned by the state, which is run by the workers, right? And socialism is not fair yet. Marx says socialism is better than capitalism. From the air, if you were looking down on a socialist society and a capitalist society, they would look the same, according to Marx. Well, he didn't know about flight yet, but still. Had he known about flight, he would have said they would have looked the same. There's factories, there's workers getting in their car in the morning, taking their lunch boxes with them, going to the factory and working, coming home at night. You know what you don't see from the air? A side of town with all the big houses, because those people are gone. Those people are gone. The owners of the factories, we've either killed them or they are now workers as well. So it looks a lot like capitalism, though, but it's not quite fair yet. It's better than it was, but he said, you know, some people are going to have more children than other people, so that means their lives are a little bit, because, kids are a royal pain in the neck. That's why I'm having to get all these videos done for my royal pain in the neck daughter to come in here and stay in this room during Christmas, which is long over by the time you see this video. So there's still some inequities over here, right? But eventually, we will reach a level of productivity, again, that I've described to you a couple of times now, to where you don't have to do the same job for the rest of your life, all right? You can do different things, and the level of productivity is so high in this society. I don't know if you watch Star Trek, but in Star Trek Next Generation, they'd go up to a replicator machine and they would say, cell phone, Samsung Galaxy S10. Then it would make one. That's the kind of society we're talking about, where it is a post-scarcity society, where things we are able to just enjoy our lives. All right, that's what communism is. So, socialism withers away. All right, it eventually becomes unnecessary because we don't have to be doing the same job for the rest of our lives and so forth as we did over here. We still do over here, and yeah, we finally enjoy true freedom. Now, modern Marxism. I'm going to tell you a couple of things about modern Marxism. I'm going to double check here, see how much more I've got here. Just a couple more pages. All right. So, modern Marxism. As I told you earlier, there's all kinds of different varieties of Marxism, and all kinds of people call themselves Marxists. They're not really Marxists and so forth. But let's talk about one fellow that I know was a Marxist, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Lenin took Marx's ideas and pushed them further ahead. And he believed that as capitalism evolved in the developed world, in Europe and the United States, so the capitalists will have exploited as many workers as they can exploit. I mean, I got nowhere else to go. Whoa, is that Africa over there? Maybe I can screw some of them people over. So that's what he thought the whole colonial movement was on Western Europe, was to go and screw over workers in other countries that hadn't been subjected to their rule yet. So he believed, let's see, recall that as capitalism matures, firms are forced by competitive pressures to replace workers with machines. This lowers their rate of profit, creating an incentive for owners to look elsewhere for surplus value or for profit. Because the developing world is a prime, untapped source of as yet unexploited workers, they will be drawn there. So that's how the imperialism was driven by the capitalist system, according to Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. He also thought that if we are able to screw over the workers in Indonesia, then we don't have to screw over our American workers quite as much. So we can put off the day of revolution by giving Americans cheap sneakers, or cheap cell phones, or whatever. He had a term for that, and I think it's in the book now. Aristocratic labor, something like that. That in developed countries, the laborers weren't as badly off as they were in the developing countries. Now, Another guy, obviously the idea that we're being screwed by the people in the rich countries was attractive to those who were under the colonial boot. But here's a strange thing about it. The people in the developing world, I erased it, were not capitalists. So how can we have this capitalist revolution, the workers rising up, when they aren't capitalists in the first place? That Marx predicted that this was all going to happen under the capitalist system. And if I'm in Vietnam, I'm not thinking of myself as a worker. I'm thinking of myself as a peasant, right? Aha! This is where Mao comes in, another later follower, the Chinese communist leader, Mao Zedong. And Mao says, okay, I love Marx, but he's got a couple things wrong. That what's really going on here with the developed countries screwing over the developing countries is that the developed countries are the real people behind the revolution are not going to be the workers, it's going to be the peasantry. The peasants are going to rise up, all right? And they're going to be the ones, let's see, it is the rural peasantry that's the true mechanism for socialist revolution, not the urban proletariat. Mao was very explicit about the need for violence, especially guerrilla warfare, to resolve the contradictions that emerge under capitalism. And then once they rise up, then they'll replace the old capitalist values. Let's see here. Okay, one last thing. Is this the last thing I want to talk to you about? Yes. One last thing I want to say here about Marx and modern Marxism is that, Marx is saying that over time, pi for profit. Economists usually use pi for profit because why don't we use P for profit? Because we use P for price. All right, so here's Marx's view. Over time, profits go down. But there's a couple of Marxists who later said, well, but we're looking around in the real world. Looks to us like profits go up. All right? They were also Marxists, but they were like, I think Marx was wrong about that part. And so there was a little bit of controversy about this. You don't really need to know a lot about this for the quiz, so I'm not going to go into it in great detail. But let's just say that there are today still Marxists who believe that Marx was right. Andrew Kleiman, the guy that helped me with the chapter, is one of them. And there are Marxists who believe that no, profits are going up, and that's going to cause the revolution because they're going to have all the money, and the workers are going to get pissed off and rise up and kill everybody. So there's kind of a split within modern Marxism along that issue. And you can read that part yourself. Now, just like in the last chapter, once you get to the section called method, you can stop. But this time there's one exception, and that is under standards. And I do want you to be aware of the part where, well, I just said it actually, that a popular research topic today is linking the financial crisis to the internal contradictions that will destroy capitalism. Such a connection is not difficult to see, and papers making this argument can do so using either Marx's original conception or Barron and Sweezy's modifications. And the same is true about the increasing maldistribution of income witnessed throughout the world. All right, so what that's trying to say is, and it's in the standards section, you'll find it there, and that's it. So you can skip everything from methods on down except for that, what I just talked about in the standards section. You do need to know that. And what I'm saying is that Marxists today can look around the world and say, I see lots of stuff consistent with what Marx said. People are fond of saying, well, when the Soviet Union collapsed, that was the end of communism. And people who are actually communist scholars, Marxist scholars, would argue that that's not true at all. That actually what happened in the Soviet Union was way premature, that was forced, that really wasn't a communist society. And until we see capitalism take over the entire world, the revolution won't really happen. And that's it for week 13. And I will see you next week for a lecture on, it'll actually just be in a few minutes for me because I'm going to do it right after this, why the government should not be run like a business. Thank you.